Who loves to eat fish? Show of hands. Got 1, 2, 3. Good. Now, for those of you who raise their hands, do you know where your fish came from? May not know, but knowing where your food source comes from is very critical to any dietary concerns that you may have. According to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, about 84% of all seafood is imported some way, somehow. As a local fisherman, I've brought my tackle box, my pole, and my life vest to show you that I've been a dedicated fisherman ever since I was a little kid. But I've also done some research to find out more about where fish live and how they're harvested and what they feed on. Knowing the acronym BAIL, spelling B-A-I-L, standing for bait, appropriate presentation, instruments, and location, you will know the credentials of where fish live, what they feed on, and how they are harvested. When you're at a restaurant and you're ordering fish, you may not know where that fish came from, but after listening to this speech, you might give to some thought at where that fish came from. Now, the two types of fish I'll be talking about are two popular types of fish in the Midwest that people like to eat, and those are panfish and walleye that associate with the acronym BAIL. The first type of fish is panfish, and the first letter B, standing for bait, that panfish like to feed on are live and artificial bait. And the types of live bait are worms, maggots, or any type of insect, but when you have limited access to the live bait, you can also use artificial bait. And the type of artificial bait I have shown here is a plastic that imitates the live maggot. And those are two types of baits that panfish like to feed on. Now the next letter, A, standing for appropriate presentation for panfish that are bobber fishing and jigging. Bobber fishing is a certain depth that you can set to where you think the fish might be, and it's a waiting game where the fish can come up and bite it, and then the bobber goes down knowing that you have a fish. The other type is a jigging type of way to fish, where it's a dynamic setting where you move your bait up and down in a type of motion where the fish can visually see that there's something moving in the water. So those are two types of presentation that panfish like to feed on. Now the third letter, I, the type of instruments needed in order to catch panfish. Obviously you're going to need a pole and some line to catch your fish, but you're also going to need some type of hooks, bobbers, if that's the type of presentation you're looking for, and then maybe a sinker in the middle here to add a little weight if needed. Now those are some of the instruments that you're going to need in order to catch panfish. Now the location of where panfish are located is best described from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They just say that panfish live in shaded regions under piers or docks of some sort, areas of structure where there's some weeds growing, or anywhere that there's some shallow areas. And those are just a few places that panfish like to hang out. So to recap of what panfish like to feed on is live and artificial bait, presentation is jigging or bobber fishing. The instruments used is pole, line, jigs, hooks, sinkers, and then where they like to live is shallow areas, places with structure, or any place that's shaded. Now, the next type of fish is the walleye, one of the most desired fish in Wisconsin and the Midwest. Now, the type of bait needed in order to catch panfish, I said panfish, right? No, we're talking about walleye. So with walleye, it's a little different. So you still have live and artificial bait. They're just a little different. And according to the Wisconsin DNR, walleyes like to feed on mainly minnows, leeches, or night crawlers. But other than the live bait, they also feed on artificial bait, such as this middle picture, which is a lure, which is a plastic with wood on the inside that has some hooks surrounded on the outside. Now those are the two types of bait that walleye like to feed on. Now for A, appropriate presentation are three different ways: casting, trolling, and jigging. Jigging is the same way as what panfish do. It's an up and down movement for the fish to see something in the water. The other two, casting and trolling, are very similar. With casting, you're more stationary and you throw out your bait and then reel it in order to get towards you. The other one is trolling, where you're in a boat or a canoe and then you have your bait casted out, but you float with your bait so that way then you both move at the same time at the same rate. So those are 3 types of presentation that walleye like to feed on. Now, the instruments used in order to catch walleye are very similar to panfish, but a little different. You're still going to have your pole and some line, but the amount of pound test, meaning the toughness of your line, is going to be a little bit stronger because you're dealing with a little bigger species. And other types of instruments needed are going to be your jig, lure, or a jigging wrap. Now, a jigging wrap is a combination between a lure and a jig to give it a little bit different presentation. Now, those are the types of instruments needed in order to catch walleye. Now, for L, location at where walleye like to hang out are in any rock areas, edges of weeds where panfish like to hang out, or during the nighttime, since they have bad sight, they need to go into shallower areas where they have a little bit more light so that they can see. So to recap of what walleye like to feed on are live and artificial bait. The 3 types of presentation are jigging, casting, and trolling, and similar instruments as panfish. And then they like to hang out in rocks, weed edges, or in shallow areas during the night. Knowing where your food source comes from is very critical to any dietary concerns that you may have. And knowing the acronym BAIL, spelling B-A-I-L, will allow yourself to know everything you need to know about where that fish came from and how it was harvested. Now, you may not know much about fishing or have the experience, but I hope you gained a little bit of knowledge about where that fish came from and how it was harvested. So next time you're at a fish fry or a restaurant, you might give it to some thought at where that fish was caught.